some stuff. But it's been good, important things, because we live in a day in which there is a war for the truth. And if we don't know the truth, and we cannot tell the truth, and we cannot recognize the truth, we're in trouble. Anything? Let's get into Second Peter 2. Now, 2 Peter 2 introduces this concept of these false teachers. And especially 2 Peter 2 is a very close parallel to the book of Jude. And as you go through 2 Peter 2, if you're familiar with the book of Jude, you will see almost identical passages there. So let's kind of take that apart. And he begins where? How does the chapter begin?
But there were also false prophets among the people, just as there will be false teachers among you. They will.
So what's his first point?
False prophets.
Alerting.
Let me put it this way: the certainty of false teachers. And he draws on history to back that up. And what is the history he draws on?
There were false prophets, there will be false teachers.
So what's the history he's drawing on?
The future.
Past.
With the Israelites, the
Yes,
prophets then.
he's going again back to the Old Testament.
Oh,
And what is the history of Israel?
And false prophets.
That there were a slew of false prophets. Who are some of the false prophets?
Balaam.
There was
Balaam.
Balaam,
Yeah.
who for money tried to figure out a way to destroy Israel, knowing God loved them. Who else?
The Pharaoh's magicians in his court.
Yeah, I
He probably didn't speak as much,
but they certainly, I'm sure, did. Not necessarily to the Israelites, but they certainly spoke to Pharaoh.
Yeah.
who was the second?
The Pharaoh's magicians, Pharaoh's.
Oh, and how about Nebuchadnezzar's guys?
All of the men in Nebuchadnezzar's courts. A big one with Moses. Remember Korah, Dathan, and Abiram?
Yeah.
God doesn't just speak through you, Moses. He can speak through us just as clearly as he can speak through you.
Don't stand near him.
Number 16. And
We
what
can
did God
start right
say?
out with the serpent too.
And what did God say? Moses, step aside.
Yeah.
Let me show you what I think of that.
Exit stage left.
No, stage down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and we can go on and on. We can talk about the false prophets of Baal that opposed Elijah. We can talk about when Hezekiah wanted to make an alliance with the king of Israel, and the prophets that said, oh yes, this is a great thing, go up, you'll have victory. And he says, isn't there anyone else? They, oh, just
Michael.
that one guy that I hate.
Michael.
Yeah,
The first false prophet, you can be as God.
yeah.
Yeah, that's what I said, Satan himself at
Yeah.
the very beginning of Genesis.
So he starts with this idea that because there have been false prophets repeatedly throughout the history of God's people, there will continue to be this. And again, I don't want to play Captain Obvious here, but sometimes we have to do that because it doesn't seem like the church has any kind of serious attitude about false teaching. We act as though that's not at all a threat. Why should we be concerned? We don't have to think twice about that. We have pastors that tell us that on a regular basis, that or simply ignore the topic. But Peter says this is certainly going to happen. If you notice, look in that, look for a four-letter word that reappears again and again and again in verses 1, 2, 1 and 2. Will. They will. There will be false teachers. They will secretly introduce destructive heresies. Many will follow their shameful ways and will bring the way of truth into disrepute. In their greed, these teachers will exploit you. So again and again and again, he stresses that this is not simply a possibility. This isn't something that might happen. This is a foregone conclusion. There will be false teachers, and you need to be prepared to deal with that. Now then, he goes into God's attitude. He starts with the certainty of false teachers. Now, starting in verse 4, he goes about God's attitude towards false teachers. And in doing that, he gives us some stories. What are the stories that Peter gives us to illustrate God's attitude towards false teachers?
The angels.
What about the angels?
He didn't spare the angels when they sinned, but sent to hell.
The fallen, so not the angels, the fallen angels. And what was God's attitude to the fallen angels?
Angels.
Put them in hell.
They've been locked up. God put them away.
Chains of darkness.
And understand that there are two groups of fallen angels. Everyone's aware of that, right? Who are the two groups of fallen angels?
You mean like the ones that are sealed away until the apocalypse?
Yeah, there are those who are free to work Satan's plans upon the earth. And we see them where in the Bible?
Like the one in the pit that was thrown into the pigs that Jesus released?
So we see them possessing people during Jesus' ministry. We see them involved in oppressing people. We see them in the book of Acts, again, possessing people. We see this girl that was possessed by an evil spirit. But there is a second group over in Revelation.
One that is so evil that they're locked up.
Yeah.
Like a pit, or like a bottomless pit or something, Tartarus, I think it's called.
Yeah,
Now,
that they are, and notice the words that he says, that they are putting them in gloomy dungeons to be held for judgment. So he's talking about this terrible group that is over in Revelation 9 that starts, the fifth angel sounded his trumpet, and a star that had fallen from the sky to the earth, and the star was given the key to the shaft of the abyss, and he opened the abyss, and out of it came smoke and these demons who have been, as Peter says, locked up there, since they fell.
Will they come out, Pastor, in tribulation or?
Yes.
After the tribulation?
During,
Or?
and that's one of the greatest plagues. And that's the point at which, verse 6, Revelation 9:6. During those days, men will seek death, but will not find it. They will long to die, but death will elude them. And I have no idea how that's going to be fulfilled.
It makes a natural disaster look like a walk in the park.
Yeah,
Oh.
it does.
I've heard people talk about, oh, that people could, shoot themselves in the head and live through it. And I don't know I don't know if it will be that they will go to kill themselves and then they'll understand, if I kill myself, I'm going to go where those people will be locked up forever. No, I can't do that. But it says they
Some
won't,
kind of restraint. maybe.
there'll be some kind of restraint on them, whether it's psychological or some other way, that people will be so horrified that they'll want to commit suicide, but they won't be able to do it.
Afraid to.
You know, if you think about it, as we get where I see this is the example when, with Lazarus and the rich man, when the rich man opened his eyes and he was in torment, he asked that Lazarus would just tip his finger. He
Yeah.
didn't ask to get out, or he didn't ask why he was in there.
Yeah.
All he asked,
Yeah.
so he had clarity of mind. So as you said, maybe the Lord would give these guys clarity of mind that they, just like you said, if I shoot myself, I'm gonna be there permanently. Do I really
Yep.
want that?
And now there's no hope for me.
Yeah.
And then second of all, what's the second illustration of God's attitude towards these false teachers?
If he didn't, if he did not spare the ancient world when he brought the
So
flood,
what's the second one?
that's it.
In your own words,
Oh,
what's that mean, is what I'm asking.
well, he killed them all except for Noah and his family.
So what are we talking about?
So if he didn't spare them, he's not gonna spare the
We're
prophet,
talking about the
false prophet,
The flood.
great flood.
right?
So he says, if God didn't spare the people of that time, and remember, they're a warning. Why is it? And they all came out in a very similar fashion. There was that year where they were all coming out. And then for a couple of years after that, all these apocalyptic,
Oh, the
secular
movies.
apocalyptic movies. What were they?
The end of the world.
What was the one that Arnold Schwarzenegger was on? He was the Terminator. Remember that wasn't at the end of the world, or?
Yeah, but
That was different.
there were, right in about 10 years ago, there was a whole wrath of them.
You're
Like
talking about
Armageddon.
all being destroyed by flood.
Yeah,
We talk about that often, yeah.
there was, the Bruce Willis one, Apocalypse, where
Armageddon.
the asteroid, Armageddon, where the asteroid
Yeah.
was gonna hit in the ocean and flood everything.
Yeah.
I thought the thing with that was that it was gonna bring soot up and cover the whole earth.
Well, but the big thing was at the end of it, the guy's standing at the thing and the wave comes and then there was the one with Morgan Freeman that came out at the exact same time that was the same thing. And then there was The Day After Tomorrow,
Yeah, that was
Wasn't
nice.
where the ship's coming through New York City.
Yeah.
Because everything froze solid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because the earth was flooding because of the, and then there was 2012 Nick Cage one that they had to build the boats up in the Himalayas. And the flood was gonna come up in the,
Yeah, but was that all God's judgment or was that?
None of them were.
none of them were, but my point of that is each of those movies showed an end of the world that, oh, we've got to be careful, the end of the world, the end of the world, the end of the world. And each of them were based on what?
Floods.
Floods. Why is that significant?
Because
The
God said.
world was destroyed by a flood.
Because God said that's the one thing I won't do. So what you're doing is you're saying, God, I hate you so much that I'm going to lie about what you're going to do. I'm going to accuse you of something you've promised you never do, and I'm going to ignore the things that you said you
Are going.
will do.
No. Like I watched The Day After Tomorrow. That one was more about the temperature change. It didn't cover the whole earth.
But it's still ice.
But the whole thing was the flood and the boats came through the
New York
city.
City.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we know that God did that. He's going to judge the world again, but how is he going to judge the world now?
Fire.
Fire.
By fire. But again, if God did it then, and then the third one, what is the third one? What's the third illustration he gives?
Just been writing things down. What is the first and the second, if there's a
What's the first one?
false prophet?
What's the first illustration he gives of
The
God's
flood,
attitude?
Angels.
And
turning it up.
Fallen angels.
Mm-hmm.
What's the second one?
Noah's flood.
the flood,
The great flood. What's the third one?
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Okay, that's interesting.
Sodom and Gomorrah.
The hot one.
And then he makes this, yeah.
Salty too.
The first nuclear bomb.
Then he makes this statement about in the midst of that, because this great judgment is going to happen. Just as the last one did, there will be false prophets. They will come. They will wreak havoc. They will destroy many. God has judged when this happened before, and he gives 3 examples, but then he ends these examples of God's judgment with a statement, and you could make the same statement about at least 2 of them. And what is the statement that he makes in the midst of this judgment?
he knows how to rescue the godly from trials.
In the midst of that judgment, what did he do with the godly?
Hold them out.
He
Rescued.
rescued them. And again, what's the illustration he uses of that? Lot being removed from Sodom.
Before
Yeah.
the ark.
But he could have easily used which illustration?
The ark.
Yeah, Noah
Noah.
being saved from the flood in the ark.
Well, didn't he also say that if there were, 4 or 5 good people, then I wouldn't destroy, or was that a different city?
He got it down to 10.
10, yeah,
Started with 50.
yeah.
Yeah.
Still didn't make it.
No.
Only missed by 6, maybe 7.
I'm surprised God let them keep going down. Like, he just let them keep bringing the number down. So
Yeah, that's why he's God and we're
Yeah.
He
right.
knew how many were really in there.
Or maybe God's disappointed that,
they had to go that far.
no,
That you gotta ask them.
he's saying, I'm surprised God let him get down to 10. Or maybe it is God's disappointed that,
Couldn't find more.
no, that he stopped at 10.
Yeah.
They didn't keep going.
What would have happened if he'd gotten down to 1?
Said yes.
There were 4 that were saved.
He might have saved the city. Who knows?
Well, since he's looking for one to build up the wall and
Yep.
stand in the
I,
gap.
I,
Yep.
think
I know it's not
more.
luck, but the expression with, I was thinking he was pressing his luck.
Yeah,
That's what he was.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what- yeah.
and then that's certainly, but again, that sometimes what we think is,
Resuming.
is presuming is actually faith. Remember when, who was the king that God went to and he said, take an arrow and just start shooting them into,
Yeah, he shot 3 times.
and he shot 3 times and gave up. And God said, you should have shot,
5 or 6 times.
yeah, you should have shot at least twice that. If you'd have shot at least twice that, I'd have destroyed every enemy around you. But because you only did it 3 times, yeah, I'm gonna give you a little reprieve, but it isn't much. Because you didn't have enough faith to say, wow, if God said do it, I'm gonna do it to the nth degree.
Sort of like the story of the widow and the number of jars that
Yeah.
she brought in.
Yeah.
And I'm sure before the oil started flowing, she thought, oh, I've really embarrassed myself. How could I have gone to all these people? They're gonna think I'm nuts. But as soon as the oil started really filling everything up, I'm sure she thought,
Brought more.
Should've got.
oh, I had 10 more friends, but I was too embarrassed to ask them.
Yeah.
And we want God, what we want God to do is, okay, God, give me a little flow for an hour to make sure it works. Then I'll go out and really put my heart into getting. And God says, one shot.
Too late.
Do it before I do anything. Never been, he didn't say to Noah, build a rowboat, and I'm gonna have a small flood. And once you see what that's like, then build a big ark because I'm gonna have a big flood. He started with
The big one.
yes or no, big thing. So again, I don't know what would have happened if Abraham would have gone further, if he'd have kept going. Certainly, where do we get the attitude that that's exactly what God wants people to do? Where do we find that portrayed? That God wants people to be bold in interceding for people that are under his wrath.
Oh, like Moses, when they were going to kill, God was like, I'm done with these people.
Yeah.
Mm.
Remember when Moses is up on the mountain and God says, you don't know what they're doing down there. I'm going to go down and kill them all. You just stay up here. Once they're all dead, every single one of them, I'll take another 400 years for your descendants to rise up.
Mm.
And I'll give them a chance. And what's Moses do?
He begs God not to.
No, God, don't do that. What'll the Egyptians say?
Yeah, it's gonna.
You linked yourself to their thing. If they get killed now, they'll say, oh, God wasn't able to get them out of there. You'll ruin your own reputation, God. You can't do that. And then once God said, okay, I won't destroy them all.
He just
and
knocks off.
Moses came down the mountain and actually saw what they were doing. What's he do?
He tells me.
Oh, you miserable boom!
Probably wished he had then.
Can we go back to that now? But the whole point is, did God want Moses to do that?
Yeah.
And the obvious answer is yes. He then goes on and identifies, if you start in the middle of 10, he begins to, actually all of 10, he begins to identify what the characteristics of these false teachers are. And what are the characteristics of the false teachers? Remember the certainty of the false teachers, the illustrations of the false teachers,
Following corrupt desires.
and now we're to the characteristics. They follow corrupt desires. That's number one.
Old and arrogant.
They live for sinful things. And how often today do we see this? Where, so much of what passes in the church is just a cloak for immorality.
I was watching a court TV episode, and one of the people that was put on the court was a pastor of a humongous church. And one of the things where they're looking at his record keeping, it said, you have $1 million for this ministry ranch. But according to your attorneys, it's a house that you live in, and it was used by using offering. No, it's a ministry mansion that we have. It's not a house. And then he like had $1 billion suits. You don't understand that when they get a little dirty, I gotta get this new suit. I gotta look impressive. And
Yeah.
Justification.
So they follow this corrupt desire.
Bold and arrogant.
No, you missed one.
Despise authority.
They despise authority. Nobody can tell me what to do. God tells me what to do. I'll do whatever I want. I don't have to follow the rules. And have you ever noticed these people, when you ever have a church fight, they're the first one to shake their fist and say, that pastor or this person or that person shouldn't be telling us what to do. We've got to throw them out. As soon as they throw them out, and as soon as they throw them out, what do?
they
do
take
the same
authority.
thing.
They take authority, and then what happens to anyone that questions them?
They throw them.
Oh, no. Who do you think you are to question me? So they only despise authority that is,
Contrary.
Contrary to theirs.
over them, not authority that's under them.
Or if it was authority even over them, but it's in the compliance with what they agree with, then they're totally fine with it.
Go ahead, Nick.
This next, the middle of 10, bold and arrogant, and they're not afraid to heap abuse on celestial beings. Where do they find celestial beings?
This goes back, we were talking in Sunday school. What's the great heresy that is coming in the church? When Peter writes this in the late 60s, 67, maybe
Right.
early 68, what has been at that point the great heresy in the church?
I mean, like worshiping angels.
What has been the great heresy in the church up to that point, up to the 60s, up to the late 60s even?
Is it with the Judaizers?
Yes. What has it been in one word?
Jews.
The law.
Legalism. Who has been the people that have been pushing that heresy?
Jews.
Jews. What has been the predominant proportion of the church up to that point?
Jews.
Jews. So up until this time, in the late 60s, the vast majority of the church has been Jewish. The heresy has come out of Judaism, and it has been legalism. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right.
Going forward, what will be the big heresy in the church, starting in about 10 years from that and going all the way through the 100s, all the way through the 2nd century and on to today?
No circumcision.
Greek philosophy.
Greek philosophy. Specifically, what is the term we have for it?
Hellenism.
Well, it was a form of Hellenism, but there is a specific term for that heresy.
Stoic, Gnostic.
Gnosticism. So that's going to be the main thrust, is Gnosticism. And Gnosticism, a lot of these people who were Gnostics claim to have visions, and they claim to speak against anyone that they've been given visions of all these things. And they would speak against even quote unquote celestial things. So if you quoted the scripture, well, as so-and-so said to Daniel, as Gabriel said to Daniel, oh, blah, blah, blah. But I was spoken to by a better angel, and you see today this whole idea of people who are just very big. I don't know about today, but if you go back 20, 30 years, 40 years ago, when I first got saved, I can remember people saying things like, I'm going to kick the devil right in the shins, and the devil better not come around here. And you ever heard stuff like that? And Peter in verse 11 says what?
Strong and powerful.
Even angels, and he's very general in his statement. Well, even angels don't do that. But Jude is more specific about what he's referring. And if you go over to the book of Jude,
Is that fighting over the body of Moses?
yeah, he gives a specific thing. If you look at Jude verses 8 and 9, he is talking, he's again, and I said 2 Peter 2 and Jude. Wow.
Bringing them out just as the elections are still going on.
Yeah,
That must be a mess, as there were, it's still.
they're very close to the end.
Right, but still, there could be people there. There were line cars when we came up here.
Yeah. It was steady when I went in. It wasn't
Yeah.
overwhelming, but I had to stand in line for 10 minutes.
We
Steady's
stood in
good.
line a bit,
Steady is good.
Yeah.
Because they didn't expect a big turnout, so
yeah.
having steady is all right.
What does Jude say different than Peter?
They didn't dare bring an accusation, a slanderous accusation.
But he's very specific. Peter just said, well, angels don't bring an accusation. Peter is very specific. He says, Jude says, is very specific. He says what?
The Lord rebuke you.
No. What's
Mi-
this?
even
Even Michael. So he gives a name to it. It's not just a generalized. If I say, well, people say that this is bad.
But if you name the person,
If I say, Reuters Press said this, or the Jerusalem Post said this, or do you see what I'm saying?
Makes it more authoritative.
a source.
If I give a name to who said it, the Speaker of the House said this, Senator so-and-so said this. Now we're talking specifics that you can either say, okay, yeah, let's check that up, or you can say, no, I don't follow that. So he says, again, a lot of these, and I hear these guys on TV do it, I'm just pounding the devil into the ground, yada ha. And both Peter and Jude says, no. You've never met an angel in the flesh. If you had, you wouldn't be so mouthy.
Mm.
What happens when angels show up?
People fall
faint.
around.
We got afraid.
Yeah.
People are sore afraid. Oh, ah, ee.
What?
So,
He went to acting school.
what?
I said, every Christmas when our kids were younger through their teen years, we used to read before we opened any gifts. We always read some Christmas
Yeah.
story, you know. And we read it in the King James one year. They were sore afraid, and Bobby and Kristen were like, oh,
Oh, yeah. Oh, that one and the other one that's terrible in the King James is what? Of well-known Jesus sayings. Yeah, suffer the little children.
Come on.
Something.
Beat those kids, because Jesus said, suffer the little children.
get the whip.
So and again, the fact that they're running their mouths about these celestial beings says what about them? What is this making reference to?
That's our ignorant.
Well, perhaps that they're ignorant, but this goes beyond merely being ignorant.
8,
We have no fear of God, no reverence of him.
And basically that they've got a very inflated opinion of themselves.
Yeah.
Which comes back to this bold and arrogant. They think they're the cat's meow. And then verse 12 gives several more. What's the next one?
these people are blameless, blasphemous at their own feasts, at the love of feasts. Wait, let's do that again. These people are blasphemers at your love feasts.
Are you in 2 Peter?
Yeah, he's got that
I mean,
function.
Oh,
It's blemish.
Blemishes. 13, he's in 13.
yeah. Back in 12.
Okay. Oh, okay. But those people are blaspheme in matters they do not understand.
So
They are like-
again, what's the next one?
Matters they don't understand.
They don't have any real spiritual understanding, but they make themselves sound like they do.
It's 8 o'clock.
Hey,
Hey, they are very good at pretending they know stuff, but they don't really.
Really?
And where's the blasphemy come in? That they are just so dog sure of what they say, even though it's contrary to scripture. They just blaspheme God to his face. And of course, that goes all the way back to Genesis 3 with what question?
Am I my brother's keeper?
Is God.
Did God really say?
Did God really say?
So the end of 12 and 13 actually isn't finished to verses 4 and stuff, because now it's in the future where they will be,
Yep,
but they will perish too, like the
Yep.
others did.
Yeah.
yep,
And it goes like full circle.
yep. We'll pick up there next week, finish 2 and go into 3.
So question, Pastor.
Absolutely.
When we're talking about false prophets here, and as we have them in our time right now, I was concerned about, I was going to tell somebody one time, well, I'd always tell people like, don't watch somebody like Joel Osteen, but